BBO or Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And yes, today we are continuing with our discussions on The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986, the book by Thomas Henry Horan. And as you see here, this is not listed as part 1, but if you haven't heard the previous segments, you can keep listening. We're just having a discussion about the Zodiac Killer, but always feel free to go back and listen to some of the previous episodes that we did on Thomas Henry Horan and a very prominent alternative theory out there. Now, because this is just a discussion about the Zodiac Killer, I wanted to read off a few comments that we had about Richard Gaikowski, and we'll see how that they are connected to the Zodiac hoax theory. Our first one comes to us from Jamie Hendrickson, YouTube user. The biggest reason that Geik is not the Zodiac was that he was a combat medic. The Zodiac left both victims alive at Lake Berryessa when he was at the scene. There is no way that a combat medic wouldn't know when someone was dead. Geik was not the Zodiac. And the first thing I can say about that is, at Blue Rock Springs, Darlene Ferrin died. And with Mike Mageau, I believe, we had some conflicting reports, like the way Thomas Horan says Blue Rock Springs happened is quite different than the mainstream narrative. But I believe, though, if we're going to look at one of them, Mike Mageau was shot in the face, a bullet went through his jaw. Alright, Lake Herman wrote as well, someone is just firing some gunshots and walking away. At Lake Berryessa, you have an attacker stabbing victims, and you would think, though, this could be a very brilliant comment right here. You would think that somebody who was an army medic, the way that Geik was, would have a higher sense of understanding about how to make sure that the victims were dead. Because when we talk about Geik and being an army medic, so many times people are just like, oh, well, he had a connection to the military, and a lot of people, even to this day, think that the Zodiac was someone who was ex-military. But, this could be a very good comment. The only thing you could say to the contrary, perhaps, is, well, hey, maybe anything is possible. But I think it's also good to note that both victims survived the attack at Lake Berryessa. Cecilia Ann Shepard did not pass away until at least 2 days after the attack in the hospital. And, yes, somebody as an army medic probably would have had a better sense of awareness when it would come to making sure the victims were dead. But the reason why I wanted to talk about that comment with the hoax theory is, I will tell you, I think every major suspect on the Zodiac list has some problems. And it doesn't mean that I completely accept Thomas Henry Horan's theory completely, that these were a series of unconnected murders, and some people created this fiction called the Zodiac Killer and started mailing in letters and ciphers and had prank phone calls and tried to make people think that these murders were connected. It doesn't mean that we endorse that completely. It's just simply all of the major suspects out there have problems. One suspect that I think has fewer problems than others is Lawrence Kane, but one of the things about him is just we don't necessarily have every piece of information about Lawrence Kane. We don't necessarily know that much about him in comparison to the other Zodiac victims. The next comment that did come in about Richard Gaikowski was from a YouTube user simply named Steve. Richard looks creepy, sounds creepy. I'd like to see if we could get his DNA and compare that to that from the recovered letters. Now, what do I got to say about that? Yes, absolutely creepy. When I did my first Richard Gaikowski upload ever, I was just like, you just get the chills reading some of that stuff sometimes, but partially that could be coming from Tom Voigt, and Tom Voigt could have reshaped the narrative and kind of manipulated the facts to make Gaikowski seem more guilty than he actually was. And Thomas Henry Horan calls out Tom Voigt by name in the book, The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax of 1986, for doing the same things that he accuses Robert Graysmith of, and that would be trying to distort the information to get a desired result. Robert Graysmith did that to Arthur Lee Allen, and he doesn't pull out Gaikowski by name, but you could see very clearly that Tom Voigt would be trying to do that to Richard Gaikowski. But I mentioned in a previous upload that I was hoping to read the book more quickly and we could have like a discussion on multiple chapters, because it's going, I absolutely love doing these things, but we want to make some progress on this thing, right? And chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10 were all very short, so ask and thou shalt receive. Some of the big takeaways from the central parts of this book. After November 9th of 1969, you don't necessarily need any insider information to compose the Zodiac letters. After November 9th, all of the information provided in the Zodiac letters was available in the newspapers. And what Thomas Henry Horan argues in this section is just that these are people that are reading the newspapers, these are people that are listening to the radio and such. They are getting this information from printed sources and the media. Thomas Henry Horan rejects the Kathleen Johns incident in its entirety. He was like, this was not Zodiac activity. Granted, though, he does say that all of these murders are not, committed by a single person, but if we're going to look at the Kathleen Johns incident, March 22nd, 1970, he's just like, this one was not Zodiac activity. The person who sent in the letters claiming responsibility learned about it from the papers. I mean, it's possible. I mean, I have to tell you, after talking about other serial killers on this channel, when we're talking about Bundy and Dahmer and Gacy and other people like Fritz Harman, some of the lesser known ones, it's quite different to go from these types of murders that were committed. Whether it's even different to go from murdering your victims with a gun to murdering your victims with a knife. Not unheard of, but it's fairly different. I mean, it doesn't happen that frequently. Usually a serial killer finds the method that works and they stick with it. But going from murdering the victims to abducting the victims, that is very abnormal behavior for a serial killer. Not impossible. What did we say when we were reading off that Richard Gaikowski comment? I mean, I guess anything is possible. Humans aren't completely limited and confined to these parameters. But I think the bigger thing is what Thomas Henry Horan states in one of these chapters in the central part of the book, that everything that was detailed about the Kathleen Johns incident was available from the papers. So I think that that's the bigger thing to go with. And, we've talked about some things on the channel. The letters go all the way up to 1978. The last confirmed incident in Zodiac activity was October 11th of 1969. And then many people say that the handwriting begins to change, and you can pull some of the later letters up on Google, and you can see the handwriting does appear to be different. Of course, I think a lot of the Zodiac letters in the 1970s are most likely not authentic, and I believe that it could be people just trolling, it could be people just doing pranks, or it could be somebody else got in on the setup. But the things, though, that are a little bit more fact-based, as opposed to just possibilities that they discuss in this part of the book, relate around Robert Graysmith's relationship to an individual named Keith Power. Keith Power was mentioned in the Paul Stein upload that we did on the Great Zodiac Killer Hoax, when he said that Keith Power was a person who took the trip log from Paul Stein's taxicab before the police could even examine it. And this was when the car was moved to, the evidence impound area, for lack of a better term, and Keith Power took the trip log, and to this day the police do not have the trip log. It was most likely kept in the possession of a reporter named Keith Power. What Horan wants us to know is that Graysmith misrepresented Keith Power's profession. He was really trying to hide the relationship between Keith Power. But this is a thing, though, that I really do not accept about Horan, and he even said this in the interview with Ed Opperman, where he wasn't completely sure that why certain journalists at the San Francisco Chronicle would be involved with this, why they would be going on. It's like, and even in the book he's writing, Keith Power could have been trying to further the Zodiac Killer myth. And then in parentheses he wrote the word why with a question mark, and that's just like one of the things that I'm just dealing with. It's like, well, okay, I get why you're saying Robert Graysmith is doing this, because he wanted to create the Zodiac fiction so that he could promote his Zodiac book, which he started on in 1972, according to Horan, is when he started compiling information for a book about the Zodiac Killer. But as well as it's going to be tied into something much larger once we get to the relationship of Robert Graysmith and Hal Snook. But it's just like, why is this guy Keith Power, who is a reporter, going along with this Zodiac Killer myth. I mean, like, I don't find any explanation. And I just told you, Horan doesn't seem to know. I'm glad he's not overly speculating, but, I mean, I just didn't really find that in this part of the book. Once again, we're not done. Maybe something else will come on up. But an interesting thing is, Robert Graysmith relies a lot on Darlene Ferrin's sister, Pam. And we've said Pam Soonen is one of the most unreliable witnesses that we've dealt with, and a lot of the earlier uploads that we did on the channel, like talking about some things about Darlene and her relationship to Richard Gaikowski, could very well have come from Pam, her sister, who was just spreading disinfo about the case. And in some of the later years, she was even trying to get on talk shows. She was an unreliable source, and she actually became one of the major sources for Robert Graysmith's book. And I think one of the previous examples we talked about this was Pam Soonen and Mike Mageau were having conversations in the hospital, but Horan said that was completely against the hospital's policy. It's most likely that those things just did not happen. There are going to be countless things. And a very quick Google search will show that Darlene Ferrin's sister was unreliable. But I do note, though, Darlene Ferrin did have a very large family. They're always talking about her older sister, her younger sister, her brother. And they actually said, though, that one of the reasons why Darlene Ferrin was likely at Blue Rock Springs Park that night, the night that she was murdered, was to purchase some marijuana for her brother. I mean, so they say in Horan's book here. So the thing is, though, it really seems like we probably do have a cease in Zodiac activity at the end of, at the end of October 1969, and all of the things that are happening afterward are not necessarily heavily tied to the Zodiac Killer. And there are just a lot of abnormalities, though, that are going on with this case. That's why none of the major suspects seem to fit. And the way that Horan does his breakdown, you can really see, okay, this guy Robert Graysmith, he's really trying to make you believe that this was Arthur Lee Allen. All these descriptions of a stocky man, but going back through the police reports, they aren't actually all talking about a stocky man who was 5 feet 8 inches tall. Going through the police source that Horan cites. I mean, I haven't read the 2,500-page case file myself completely, but through the things that he is citing, he's like, not everyone was talking about a 5'8" stocky man. Not everyone was talking about somebody that resembled Arthur Lee Allen. Robert Graysmith was trying to force this particular narrative, and hopefully we can get some more answers about the relationship between Robert Graysmith and this reporter named Keith Power, who took Paul Stein's trip log and hid it from the police, and seems to be going along with Horan's Zodiac Killer hoax. But that's another thing, though, that's just like, I'm not completely sold on it. I'm not convinced. And someone left another comment on a previous Zodiac Killer hoax upload that we did on the channel. Thomas Horan is saying a lot of things, but it's always falling short. And I'm like, yeah, I really kind of want to follow along with some of the things that he's saying, but it is falling short. It's just like, it's just not going the distance. And, some people have been examining some things. It's like, in the first ever Zodiac Killer hoax upload that I did, we had another comment come in, and somebody was like, it's not that the hoax theory is wrong, it's just maybe it's not really functioning the way that people think they are. Maybe there is some truth that people are trying to link together unconnected murders, but maybe it's not happening exactly the same way that Thomas Henry Horan says it's happening. But I would love to hear what you think about any of this. I'll just ask some questions that we've had from the past. Do you believe that the Kathleen Johns incident in Zodiac activity is authentic? Do you believe that any of the letters after November 9th of 1969 are authentic? I mean, we're talking about anything in 1970 to 1978. Do you believe that any of those letters are actual Zodiac activity at all? And do you think, though, what do you think about that comment we said about Richard Gaikowski? That he, as an Army medic, he would have known how to make sure the people at Lake Berryessa were dead. What would you say about that? And that's all for me now. Until next time.